girl dinner, girl math, girl titillating candy-colored film adaptation of a classic novel exploring themes like race, class, and cycles of abuse. No, it doesn't quite roll off the tongue, does it? Last night, I watched Wuthering Heights with Yoda. That's why she's here. Not because she needs attention 24/7. I read Wuthering Heights for the first time in my 30s a few years ago. I did read it in its absolutely stunning edition. I mean, look at it. I was shocked, to say the least, not really because of the content, because I do read a fair amount of horror, so, you know, it's all fair game. What I was shocked by was the significant gap between how people discuss this novel and the characters and the core themes and the actual novel that I experienced. Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights is dark and gritty. It's a book about trauma and class immobility, race, and generational cycles of abuse. And yes, it's also a novel about the kind of obsessive, toxic love that ensures mutual destruction. And yet, in the cultural consciousness, this narrative has been flattened into a tragic love story. The kind of love story that might be obsessive, sure, but is also about soulmates, about being so deeply in love with another person that you cannot survive without them. And that has been heavily romanticized, not only as a concept in general, but also very specifically in the context of this novel. The sheer number of times that I have seen, especially teenage and young women, yearn for their own Heathcliff to find them. Surprising? No, sadly. Horrifying? Indubitably. While I enjoyed the novel for the beautiful writing, the complex character development, and the exploration of these really nuanced, complicated themes, and also the gorgeous setting of the scene, the really strong sense of place, I wasn't swept away in the love story or the tragedy enough to make it my whole personality. So when the film was announced, when the casting was revealed, when we started getting stills from production, I wasn't all that invested emotionally, didn't have a horse in the game. I was, however, deeply confused by the choices it looked like Fennell was making, and that has not changed. In fact, after watching the film, my confusion has only grown. For a novel centered on an unfulfilled and unconsummated love that festers and curdles into a destructive obsession, adapting it into a film packed with sexual encounters, BDSM, shock, and gore is certainly a choice. Now, is the choice to make Wuthering Heights sexier and grosser ultimately the worst aspect of this adaptation? No, not for me personally. There are bigger fish to fry, but it does make me pause, and it does make me wonder what exactly Fennell was aiming for with this story. Who's her target audience? What is she trying to say? And what does she understand Wuthering Heights, the novel, to be?
Well, I think the thing is that it's my favorite book in the world, you know, and I like many people who love this book, I'm like kind of fanatical about it. And so I knew right from the get-go, I couldn't ever hope to make anything that could even like encompass the like greatness of this book. So all I could do was, I don't know, make a movie that made me feel the way the book made me feel. And so therefore it just felt right to say it's Wuthering Heights, and it isn't.
The novel Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë is not a simple romance. It's a gothic novel full of ghosts and revenge, and the Moors as a character are all their own. Heathcliff is introduced from the outset as a racialized outsider. It's not a surprise, it's not hidden in many layers of subtext. While Heathcliff's race may be ambiguous, his dark skin is not. Critics have long emphasized that Heathcliff's depiction taps into Victorian imperialist and racial anxieties. His characterization as dark and othered fits within 19th century discourses of outsiders shaped by British colonialism. In one of the most famous quotations from the novel, Cathy states, "It would degrade me to marry Heathcliff now, so he shall never know how I love him, and that, not because he's handsome, Nellie, but because he's more myself than I am." Said degradation is not simply about class or wealth in the novel. It's about Heathcliff's proximity to whiteness, or lack thereof, something he cannot change about himself no matter how many times he goes abroad, god and becomes a pirate, or whatever other theories people have for how Heathcliff became so rich. The novel also does something more complex structurally than almost any adaptation is willing to acknowledge. The novel comes in two parts, and the second part explores the experiences of the second generation, and through young Cathy and Hareton, Emily shows us that cycles of abuse do not have to replicate forever. Those patterns can be broken. Ending with Cathy's death, spoiler alert, it has been 200 years, as this film does, leaves us on a bittersweet, romantic note, despair and a tearful goodbye. It doesn't allow us to explore what happens to Heathcliff in the aftermath of his grief, a grief that is so deep, so abiding, so destructive, just like their love, that he becomes the worst version of himself, a true monster abusing everyone around him. And once again, it's that second generation that is able to break out and free themselves from this cycle of abuse rather than perpetrating it for yet another generation.
And the Heathcliff casting, I mean, has had some comments around if that should be a person of color and, you know, casting Jacob in it. What do you kind of think about that commentary?
I think the thing is everyone who loves this book has such a personal connection to it. And so you can only ever kind of make the movie that you sort of imagined yourself when you read it, and then you can, I don't know, I think I was sort of focusing on kind of sadomasochistic elements of it, and so...
This film is full to the brim with sex, and that's fine. I'm not a prude. Speaking of, this video is kindly sponsored by Bellesa. Bellesa is a bi-women company for all things sexual wellness, and their mission is to encourage everyone to embrace, explore, and celebrate their sexuality. And that's why my friends at Bellesa and I are literally sending out free toys or gift cards for toys to everyone who signs up to my giveaway with the link in my description. Let's talk about some of their spicy adult toys. You've probably seen this toy go viral all over the internet, the Rose toy from Bellesa. This absolutely adorable and very travel-friendly toy is TSA approved, made from 100% body-safe silicone and splash-proof, though not 100% submersible. USB rechargeable with 10 different suction modes, this little flower-shaped toy is iconic. There's also their famous air vibe, which is almost entirely silent, but extremely powerful, kind of like Heathcliff in this film, who did very little other than stare at Cathy in various locales brutally. The air vibe provides dual stimulation, all while being waterproof and rechargeable. Then there's the thump, a toy that does it all. Vibrates, suctions, and thumps, designed to be an all-in-one replacement for external vibes, and utilizing Bellesa's improved Pleasure Jet technology, waterproof and rechargeable, and is made from premium quality silicone. Some of the best things about Bellesa's toys are that they're designed ergonomically to fit really comfortably in your hand in a way that makes sense. They're also very discreet and elegant. Many of their toys come with sleek storage cases that fit effortlessly in your life and don't give anything away. Don't forget that Bellesa is giving away free toys or gift cards for toys to everyone who enters the giveaway in my description, so make sure to enter to get your free toy or gift card for a toy from Bellesa and embrace and celebrate your own pleasure. I think my issue with the sex in the film is not that it exists, but that it seems to serve as shock value more than as intimacy or true character development. There's the attempt to make the creaking rope at a hanging sound like a creaking bed during sex. There's the subsequent very tight zoom on a man's erection that is being pointed out by the large crowd, and also turning on one nun so much that she is pleasuring herself in the middle of said crowd. A random unnecessary kinky scene between two servants who were made inexplicably hot so that we could watch them do some BDSM with horse tack in a stable, as the impetus for Cathy and Heathcliff to develop this mutual sexual tension, even though it was already building before this point. Also, PSA, do not put horse tack in any of your orifices, even if you clean them first. They are so filthy and not in a good way. And Fennell is not satisfied with trying to trick us into thinking that we're hearing an intimate encounter by using the sounds of someone's death only once in this film. We get it a second time as servants are gutting a pig, and again the sounds are intentionally and explicitly used to emulate a very different kind of activity. When Wuthering Heights was published, it was received with so much horror and moral outrage. There were Victorian critics describing the original novel as vulgar, coarse, and full of unnatural horrors. So maybe, giving Fennell the benefit of the doubt, she was trying to recreate that Victorian outrage in the modern day with this film adaptation. Can she cause modern audiences to be so shocked and appalled that they will react to the film as vulgar, coarse, and full of unnatural horrors? And if that's what she was going for, fine. But moral outrage is not depth. In the novel, brutality serves the themes. Violence is cyclical. Cruelty reveals power structures. And obsession bears the character's emotional stunting and trauma. In the film, there is cruelty and sex that feels like it exists solely to provoke discourse online, not to expose some deeper meaning for the characters in this world. The film is so hyper self-aware, and I think that's to its detriment. Now, this film is objectively beautiful, okay? I'm not knocking the cinematography. The costumes, as anachronistic as they may be, are gorgeous. The sets are absolutely stunning. There is such a dollhouse fantasy Tim Burton-esque quality to all of the visuals in this film, and they are objectively stunning to look at.
How extraordinary.
But this hyper-stylization does get to a point where it feels excessive, especially when this focus on the aesthetic of it all starts to steal emotional weight from the scenes that should resonate with the audience the most on a deep human level. Kathy's illness and death should be devastating. Whether you like her or not, Kathy's death at only 18 in the novel, mere hours after delivering her premature daughter, is tragic. But in this film, when Kathy is sick and dying, the focus is not on her deeply human experience, her mortality, her suffering. The focus is on as many stunning wide shots as possible that are clearly prioritizing being a feast for the eyes over being emotionally affecting. We get leeches, not only on Kathy's body, but crawling up the skin walls. We get a literal river of blood coming from between her legs in a shiny candy apple red. And instead of making me feel the inevitable weight of loss and sorrow, these shots are totally absurd. This film, especially in the later half, becomes absurdly theatrical, grotesque to the point of camp. And that's not inherently a bad thing, but when the visuals are so loud that they are screaming at you every single moment, it becomes much harder to take a step back and notice the subtler, more grounded emotional beats of the story, to feel the emotional weight of a life taken too soon. And the exact same thing happens when Kathy's father dies. Instead of feeling tragic, the comically oversized piles of empty bottles surrounding him turn it into a farce. It's mere spectacle, just like the rest of the film. And again, it's not that stylization is inherently bad. Films can have a heightened aesthetic. They can be really expressive. They can be surreal and fantastical and vibrant and even anachronistic. But here, the visual excess doesn't deepen the emotion. It competes with it constantly to the point of nullifying it. When everything is turned up to 11 all the time, nothing stands out. And so Kathy's death, which should feel like the emotional and tragic climax of this half of a story, turns into yet another striking image among many. Stunning, grotesque, about to be pinned into infinity and posted on everyone's edgy Tumblr, but ultimately empty and utterly unmoving. One of the most significant losses in this adaptation is the erosion of the greater themes. When Heathcliff is stripped of his racial ambiguity, you lose the colonial context. You lose the aspect of his outsider status that is structural. And of course, you lose the full weight of not only class hierarchies, but racial ones. Kathy choosing Edgar over Heathcliff becomes far less nuanced, more about wealth and class than immutable characteristics and racism. And not only did this film adaptation completely bulldoze through the racial tensions that are inherent in the original text, but we also lose the specificity of the setting. The Yorkshire moors, being in the north of England and what that means, and the distinction between the north and the south is entirely ignored in this adaptation, perhaps unsurprisingly based on Fennell's own upbringing and experience as a southern, posh, extremely wealthy heiress. The north and south distinction is such a huge divide, and it's something that Emily Brontë brought full force into her work because it was such an integral part to her own lived experience. When you adapt a northern working class story into a glossy prestige project and strip it of its social critique, something essential and valuable is irrevocably lost. In the film adaptation, Cathy bestows a name upon Heathcliff and is told by her father that Heathcliff will be her pet. This loses a lot of its deeper nuance and meaning when Heathcliff is cast as a white man. In the novel, racialized Heathcliff is described as being dog-like and wild several times. Without that dimension, so much of the scaffolding of the thematic explorations in this text absolutely crumble away. I will share some of my favorite creators' analyses of this film in the description box if you're looking for even more discussions, and especially Princess Week's video that touches on the race of it all. I know I already touched on this, but I just have to bring it up again, how frustrating it is that almost every Wuthering Heights adaptation, including this latest, ignore the whole second half of the story. In this adaptation, one of the final shots is Cathy dead in her bed, Heathcliff holding her and kissing her corpse and crying. It feels like it wraps the story up with a bow and tries to present it as solely or predominantly a story of loss and grief. This kind of framing, this kind of ending presents Wuthering Heights as a tragic romance. And it's no surprise that the collective consciousness continues to refer to Wuthering Heights as such, continues to consider Wuthering Heights a tragic romance, despite the text existing and contradicting that at every turn. In the novel, we continue to explore the lives of the next generation, and we watch the ways that they have inherited traits of their parents, the ways they have been affected by cycles of abuse and generational trauma, and we watch them fight against it and try to break out of the cycle. The novel continues on past Cathy's death, and it leads us to see how Heathcliff is impacted by the grief, not just in the moment, but for the years and decades to come. Heathcliff becomes a shell of himself. He turns into a monster. He abuses and harms everyone around him and cannot control his anger and despair, and is a harrowing depiction of the ability of grief to twist us from the inside out and turn us into monsters. The novel is examining cycles of abuse, starting with a character who is completely deleted from Fennell's film adaptation, Cathy's elder brother, who spends their childhood bullying and abusing Heathcliff, in part because their father favors Heathcliff over his own children. Without these characters before and after, we lose this core theme of the novel. Stripped of this context, stripped of these themes, it turns into simply a tragic, doomed romance, kind of like Romeo and Juliet, which is ironically referred to early on in the film, Isabella recapping the story to her brother, emphasizing heavy-handedly the guilt on the part of the maid, who apparently set all of this tragedy in motion. And as an aside, as someone with a degree in theater, blaming the maid in Romeo and Juliet for the tragedy is the most ridiculous reading I've ever heard. And also, that extends to the way that Nellie is treated within this film adaptation of Wuthering Heights, but that is a discussion for another day. Not only does Isabella deliver a twisted retelling of Romeo and Juliet that is meant to prime us for how to perceive this similar, I guess, in Fennell's mind, tragic romance with a maid as the main villain and impetus for all of the tragedy and suffering, she also has her characterization changed in a absolutely fundamental way. In the novel, Isabella is so horrifically abused by Heathcliff that she ends up escaping with her child to live in poverty. Isabella's strength of character and ability to choose differently for herself and to try to protect herself and her child from Heathcliff's rage and violence is completely erased in the film that instead depicts their dynamic as consensual puppy play with a wink and a smirk on Isabella's end. And that moment might have been the moment that made me the most angry while watching this adaptation, again as someone who is not particularly emotionally invested in this story or these characters, because it just so deeply perverts, in multiple senses of the word, Isabella's characterization, what she represents, and her strength as a woman within the original novel of Wuthering Heights. Isabella making the choice for herself to escape an abusive situation with a wealthy husband, to live in poverty with her child, to keep her and her child safe physically rather than focusing on their access to class and wealth, is an absolutely radical idea for the time that this novel was published, and to erase it entirely, once again with a wink and a smirk, and played for laughs, is unsettling to say the least. And we all know why Emerald made this choice, because who's going to lust over Heathcliff if he's depicted as viciously abusing his wife? If We see him hang his wife's dog, as he does in the novel. She wants Heathcliff to be rough and gruff and a little dangerous, but only in a sexy way, only in a he'll take you wildly on the moors kind of way, not in the way that he is depicted in the novel, which is once again not as a romantic lead, but as a literal monster and abuser. Heathcliff even asks her for explicit consent in ways that blunt his immorality. And what purpose does this serve other than to make Heathcliff the romantic hero he was never meant to be? The original novel doesn't romanticize Heathcliff, it exposes him for all of his cruelty and brokenness. This film ignores Emily's authorial intent to aestheticize Heathcliff into a romantic Harlequin novel cover hero, which perpetuates a centuries-long rewriting of this novel's purpose and message in the cultural collective consciousness. If this film was not titled Wuthering Heights and all of the names were changed, would anyone make that connection? Or is this film, which is just entirely its own thing, riding on the prestige coattails of a beloved centuries-old classic novel, while stripping it of all of its depth and meaning that made it a classic in the first place? The original novel shocked Victorian audiences because it refused to flatter them. It called them out for their classism, their racism, their imperialism, their obsession with status and lineage and social positioning. It refused to create likable characters. It refused to portray love as pure and redemptive. It refused to deliver a happy ending and a moral tide with a neat little bow. This adaptation, on the other hand, shocks a modern audience by indulging them their most wild, guilty pleasures on the big screen in a beautiful package without actually challenging them intellectually at all. There is a core of a tragic love story here, both in the novel and in this film, and that can be compelling. It has been compelling, but the execution of it in this film is incredibly shallow. When you remove the structural critiques, the racial tension, the class immobility, the generational reckoning, and replace them with shock, sex, and a glossy aesthetic, you're not transforming the novel's power into a new medium. This film is surprisingly empty considering the richness of the source material, and we, the people, are crying out for a little substance. And that's why I'm rereading the novel. I wasn't originally planning on doing a reading vlog for this reread. I thought I might take my time and really go deep on this second read, really analyze the characters, the themes, the plot, the writing style, the social commentary, and compare and contrast to this film adaptation, maybe even watch a few more film adaptations. But if you'd be interested in a reading vlog, especially if you're planning your own reread or maybe wanting to read this for the first time and would like to have a buddy to go through the experience together, let me know in the comments because I definitely could do that. But for now, I feel like I've been talking enough, so I'm gonna get going. Let me know your thoughts on the film and the novel in the comments. Thank you again to Bellesa for sponsoring this video. Don't forget that Bellesa and I are giving away free toys or gift cards to everyone who enters the giveaway with a link in my description box, so don't wait. Enter that giveaway and get your free toy or gift card. Thank you again to Bellesa for sponsoring this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.